But this has been a wildly underdeveloped strategy. The strategy of what actually would we do to change the hearts and minds of people on both sides of this struggle? How would we go about that, and what are the obstacles to that? And that leads into trying to understand the psychodynamics and the spiritual dynamics that are going on in both populations. Okay, now, to go there, I want to step back from what I've just said, and talk a little bit for a second about Egypt, the Egyptian uprising. Because there are many people who, though cheering it on, are nevertheless worrying, where will it lead? Will it lead to an ultimate triumph of some form of fundamentalism, or will it still be, will it be able to retain itself as the victory of essentially a bourgeois revolution, a revolution for rights and freedoms? And why do I call it a bourgeois revolution? Because the people who led this revolution, or this uprising, were not particularly concerned in their public statements, in any event, and in what they were rallying around, about the plight of ordinary Egyptians. They were worried about the plight of those significant sections of the population, but still a small percentage, that want freedom. And I'm all for it. I was a big cheerleader for it, and as Sherry said, I wrote a thing in the Al Jazeera saying white Jews around the world are celebrating this victory. But I want us to understand that there is a tremendous problem that happens when, and that problem is generated by global capitalism. And that problem is this, that as global capitalism and its ethos has become more and more the dominant ethos of the world, it's an ethos of materialism and selfishness. It's an ethos that says, look out for number one. The freedom that people win when they overturn a dictator is often the freedom to compete effectively in the global capitalist market. And this causes a very difficult inner spiritual struggle because, number one, a very large section of the populations of this country and of Egypt and of Israel know that they will not be winners in the global competition, that they will not be advantaged by that global competition. That's number one. Number two, they see their traditional forms, family, love, commitment, all the things that were built around an ethos of solidarity breaking down, as they have in the most advanced and capitalist country, the United States, but as they are also in other places where capitalist ethos takes over. And that's what leads people very often to feel attracted to fundamentalist religious forms. Because what the fundamentalist religious forms offer is a sense of that we are for solidarity, we are for commitment to each other, we are for the kinds of communities that we're not about looking out for number one, but about solidarity, commitment, family, long-term connection, and some framework of meaning and purpose for life that transcends the individualism and selfishness of the capitalist marketplace. So when we see fundamentalism developing, instead of simply saying, oh, that's because these people are crazy, instead we should see it, I believe, as a deformed, that is a mistaken form of protest of global capitalism and its ethos. Mistaken because then it identifies the only way to protest that as adopting what are often either racist or sexist or homophobic or xenophobic forms of protest. But you have to understand, or we have to understand, that underlying that is a real need, not a craziness. And that real need will be there, and it is there not only amongst Egyptians and the threat of a fundamentalist movement there, but in Israel, where fundamentalism is becoming more and more popular. Again, not because people are crazy, but because there is no movement that both supports liberation and simultaneously supports speaking to the spiritual and ethical and love needs of people. In other words, we get a freedom movement that is about rights, and we get a reactionary movement that is about meaning, purpose to life, and love, caring, solidarity, and generosity. The things that a progressive movement or a liberal bourgeois revolution never talks about. Do you see? Okay, oh my God, one more minute. So that's another thing that we have to keep in mind in the kind of movement we want to build. So how do we address some of these issues? Well, the first thing we're talking about is that we need a movement that is spiritually alive, that talks to the spiritual needs and combines that with an understanding of the need for political liberation and economic liberation. Secondly, we are advancing in Tikkun and the Network of Spiritual Progressives a global Marshall Plan. And what we're saying is not simply, hey, let's keep funding for Egypt and Israel. No, we're saying we need a global Marshall Plan to once and for all end global poverty, homelessness, hunger, inadequate education, inadequate health care, and that should start in the Middle East. So we should be asking not for a little bit, we should put forward at this moment a global Marshall Plan that starts in the Middle East as one part of our showing caring. And that has to be based on a whole new understanding of what foreign policy should be about. Our foreign policy should be about the ethos of caring. We should replace the notion that solidarity or safety comes through domination and instead replace that with the notion of that our foreign policy security, our homeland security, can come through caring for each other. So I'll just say this one last word because I never got to the main point, which is that we also have to recognize that we're dealing with two peoples, the Palestinian and Israeli peoples, who have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Both of whom, and so in post-traumatic stress disorder, when you have people who are victims, and both sides have been victims, the last thing you want to do is to try to coerce them. So that's why I said, okay, coercive strategy, but the last thing you want to do for a PTSD sufferer is to say, we're going to force you to do what's in your interest. That drives them into more and more crazy activity. What you need is a loving and caring and supportive activity. That's why I personally don't favor BDS, not only because I don't think it will work, but also because I think that the approach to Israel as well as to Palestine has to be a loving and caring one, not a coercive one. And I'll shut up now, but just to say that that in order to make that work in Israel, we have to confront one other dominant pathology in that society, and that is the fear of being a friar. That is the fear of being a fool or schlemazel because they trusted in others. That fear is already now part of American political discourse in a different language. It's happened as a result of the great, not just the economic depression, but the emotional depression that happened after Obama failed to come through for us in the past 2 years. A huge depression that has led many, many people away from politics and away from hopefulness. We have to counter that and help people understand that it is possible again to believe that other human beings have the same needs you have, and that means and confront directly the fear that people have that if they trust others, they will be destroyed.